This video is for educational purposes and teaching English for a second language learner only. Feel free to download the material and use it in your classroom. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell to let you know when a new episode is available.
Hi everyone, many thanks for joining me for another episode of my YouTube channel. As you can see, I'm standing here on the ground of the BBC's Nottingham in London Road, West Bridgford. Now, this year, the BBC is celebrating its 100 years anniversary. Back in the 1970s, BBC was up against another major public broadcast house, which was the VOA. But the BBC managed to be on top of everything in the sense that, these days, 500 million people are actually turning to the BBC for views and news. So the BBC must have been doing something right. If you are interested in knowing more about how they can stay on top of the business, join me in this journey through 100 years of the BBC.
Apologies for my raspy voice, possibly because of lack of sleep and changing weather. Other than that, I'm fine. For over 100 years, BBC has a pool of talents that help broadcast first-rate journalism in their news reporting, and there will be no ground that they will never report. From the world-devastating conflicts to sweeping changes across the globe, we can be sure that a BBC correspondent will give you a fair and measured assessment for the world's biggest news stories. Some good examples include World War II correspondent Richard Dimbleby reporting from an RAF fighter plane, Hugo Bochega reporting under explosions in Ukraine's capital Kiev, and Liz Dissette chronicling the war in Afghanistan. BBC journalist also documents part of the world where massive social and political changes took place, such as Katie Eddy reporting from Tiananmen Square and Jonathan Head reporting from Jakarta on the financial crisis in 1998 that toppled the Suharto's administration after 32 years in power. The BBC's trusted reports on famine in Ethiopia, Bob Geldof's Live Aid concert, and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic makes the BBC now the source of news and views enjoyed by 500 million audience across the world. As an institution in the real sense, the BBC is not without controversy, and this includes Amol Rajan, the BBC's media editor and the presenters on the Today program, who has apologized for foolish commentary he made about members of the royal family in articles written in 2012 in The Independent. As a Republican, obviously, when he recently presented the royal documentary The Princes and the Press, this royal documentary was received with slightly mixed reviews. On the 20th of November 1995, the year before Diana's divorce to Prince Charles, now King Charles, the Princess's interview with journalist Martin Bashir aired on BBC Current Affairs show called Panorama. The interview was indeed a controversial one. 20 years after, this documentary faced another scrutiny over the alleged unethical way that Bashir secured the interview. The BBC has apologized unreservedly after the findings of Lord Dyson's inquiry were published following a 6-month investigation by the former Supreme Court judge, which has cost the UK broadcaster around £1.5 million. What came out of this is that as an institution, the BBC might have people who work for them, and these people are not angels. Therefore, they might violate the law or hurt people in carrying out their duties. But as a steadfast institution, the BBC will put these people back in line. No one is above the institution. One of my favorite programs is the weekly BBC's News Watch. This is an opportunity for viewers or listeners to air their concerns about the quality or the impartiality of the report by the BBC, which also, to some extent, reflects the British society. For instance, during the weeks of mourning of the Duke of Edinburgh and the Queen and their eventual funerals, some people expressed concerns that this took too much of airtime, as if other news are not worthy enough. Others would complain that the first report on Hurricane Ian focuses at the time when it lands on the US soil, whereas this hurricane actually wreaks havoc in Cuba a few days before and left unreported. Some BBC producers and editors and decision makers then responded to these grievances, making it a dialogue and an opportunity for this institution to grow as a public broadcasting house. Now, as you learn the English language, you might come across the term BBC English. But before that, let's talk about the accent across UK. Although it's a small island, there are many different accents across the country. Received pronunciation, or RP, is an accent, not a dialect, since all RP speakers speak standard English. In other words, they avoid non-standard grammatical constructions and localized vocabulary, which is characteristic of regional dialects. It is regionally non-specific, meaning that it does not contain any clues about a speaker's geographic background, but it reveals a great deal about their social or educational background. Now, RP then has been misleadingly called the BBC English, the Queen's English, or Oxford English. And if you have the opportunity to study and live in the UK, you will realize that only the tiny fraction use it. In fact, only 3% of the UK population speak it. But it does not mean that you do not need to learn or know something about this, what we call the posh accent. If you want to know how this posh accent might sound, have a listen to this Emma Thompson giving her eulogy or, something that he wants to say about her fellow actor Alan Rickman after he passed away a few weeks ago. Have a listen.
The most remarkable thing about the first days after Alan died was the number of actors, poets, musicians, playwrights and directors who wanted to express their gratitude for all the help he'd given them. I don't think I know anyone in this business who has championed more aspiring artists, nor unerringly perceived so many great ones before they became great. Quite a number said, latterly, that they'd been too shy to thank him personally. They had found it hard to approach him. And of all the contradictions in my blissfully contradictory friend, hold on, Thompson, this is perhaps the greatest, this combination of profoundly nurturing and imperturbably distant. He was not, of course, distant.
I have always wanted to work for the BBC, and at one moment in my life I applied to the BBC Indonesia, but unfortunately I was up against people who have been in the business for much longer than myself, and I didn't get the job. As a consolation, during my study in Bristol back in 2015, I took the liberty to visit the BBC Broadcasting House, the London home for its television, radio and online services on April the 1st, 2015. It was quite a wow moment, just experiencing the sheer pulse of the industry and the many different divisions and languages that BBC needs to serve. I had a picture taken beneath this larger-than-life Peter Capaldi, a Scottish actor, the 12th incarnation of Doctor Who, one of BBC's most enduring series. And a couple of days ago on Halloween night, I spotted Capaldi on a Jumbotron promoting his Devil's Hours series on Amazon Prime. It is simply amazing to see this actor reincarnated in a totally different roles across their career span, making himself an institution just like the BBC that successfully navigates the shift in the media industry from radio, television, and then online, but keeping it relevant as ever and remaining at the top of their game.
That's it for this edition of the centenary anniversary of the BBC. Join me next week for another episode of what is interesting in the British life and institution. Until then, take care.